G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome to the next installment in our new series, How to Play Warhammer 40,000, 10th edition. Alrighty ladies and gentlemen, so this is the first video in our How to Play Warhammer 40,000 10th edition version of the series, where we're going to be digging into the core mechanics of the game, how to build your army list, and the ways that you can play the game, which today's video is going to be looking at the different ways that you can play the game of Warhammer 40,000. Now, in this series, we are going to do two different types of videos. For most sections of this series, a TLDR version for those veterans among you who are just wanting to see what changes are present in the game, as well as also a fully expanded version of this video for the newer players out there wanting to come to terms with how to play the game. So now in this video, we're going to be discussing the different ways that you are going to be able to play the game of Warhammer 40,000 for 10th edition. So ladies and gentlemen, there are a couple of different ways that you're going to be able to play the game that we're going to be going through. And the first one up is open play. Open play is probably the simplest form of playing Warhammer 40,000. And how this works is that you just pull out the models that you're wanting to play with, while you don't have to worry about the points or the number of models within a unit. You can speak with your opponent beforehand if you want to agree upon some parameters for the game, if you wish to do so, but you do not have to. This form of the game is generally the best way to play when you've only got a handful of units when you're first getting into the game, and it's a great way to learn the game initially as well. When you've got one or two box sets, you might have a box of intercessors and a Primaris captain that you're wanting to use, and you just can do a unit versus unit and character versus unit and character and just see how the game plays. Like, that is one such way you could do open play, for example. So there are a couple of pros which you don't need to worry about creating an army list or using points when you come together to play an open play style of game, and it is a great way to get started with any of the starter sets or the models you may have already purchased with the Leviathan box set or a combat patrol or even just a box of intercessors and a Primaris captain, as I was saying. However, there are a few cons with this version. This form of the game can be quite unbalanced if you're not managing the expectations with the people you are playing with when you're playing this method, and due to its imbalance and lack of structure, it is generally not widely played outside of those initial couple of games that you do end up playing with newer opponents like yourself if you are a newer player. Now, the next form of the game is the newest addition to the way that you can play Warhammer 40,000, and that is Combat Patrol. Now, Combat Patrol used to be a points or power level that you could play at in 9th edition. However, Games Workshop have actually changed this going into the 10th edition of the game. Now, Combat Patrol is a different format of playing Warhammer 40,000, being specifically to use the miniatures included in any of the Combat Patrol box sets. They will also have simplified data cards that will have simplified rules on them. For example, they did preview the Space Marine Terminator Captain. That the preview of the Combat Patrol version meant that it didn't have some of the rules on there, some of the weapon options, whereas the full version does have some of those rules and the weapon options there as well. And they are going to be balancing each Combat Patrol against each other, so they're going to be able to They're going to be a nice balanced experience to play those combat patrols against each other. So if you are wanting to get into the game and use a combat patrol and you got some buddies getting in, you can all grab a combat patrol each, and once you get it all built, you don't have to get it necessarily painted if you don't want to, but you can start playing with the games and getting things going straight away as well. Now, you can find the main missions, the rules, and the faction data cards for Combat Patrol free on the Warhammer community website, and I will link those down below in the description if you are just wanting to jump in and see what those are. If you've already got larger armies or you're wanting to start a new faction, you don't want to pick up the Combat Patrol, you can see what data cards are there and pick up those model kits instead. Now, this format of the game creates a great way to play small games of Warhammer 40,000 without having to worry about the points of the models that are contained within each Combat Patrol. So the pros of this is the Combat Patrols are quite balanced, and they're being balanced against each other. So when new ones come out, they will be balanced against the rest to provide a nice even playing experience. This format will be a great way to play the game of Warhammer 40,000 if you've got a limited amount of time on your hands to get a game in. Say you've only got an hour, hour and a half to play a game. this might be the best way to do so rather than trying to play 1,000 points or 1,500 points in an hour and a half. As the new codexes do come out, it's expected that each Combat Patrol box set will be updated with new units that you'll be able to use in this format with fresh data cards as well, but that has not been confirmed at this time by Games Workshop to my knowledge. However, this format does have some cons to go with it. Due to the nature of the Combat Patrols, they will be limited to the number of models for those units and the units in them for each faction to use for playing in this format. The Combat Patrol rules also set how you actually build your miniatures, so if you're not wanting to build them in a particular way, you might not want to be playing Combat Patrol, or you might have to double up on miniatures to be able to build them in the way that the Combat Patrol cards are specifying for particular Combat Patrols if you are wanting to play Combat Patrol games. And it can become quite stale over time unless you're constantly picking up a new Combat Patrol to play within the game of Combat Patrol for Warhammer 40,000. Now, the next one up we have got is narrative play. Now, narrative play is more focused on creating and playing out a story, and there are a variety of different ways that this can be achieved. The more common ways that this form of game is played or managed is by using a map-based campaign system or a linear campaign-based progression, just to name a couple of different options that the community have come up with over the years. Narrative games are able to be either just single games between two players, or can be multiple games happening simultaneously between multiple factions and multiple players over multiple weeks or months at a time. This is a great way for your gaming group, as you can organize a campaign with an overarching story that you're all able to be a part of and try and tell with everyone being involved, rather than just two people playing two factions in a story, which you can still do as well, but it's also great to involve more people if you're able to or willing to. This format used to use power levels, however, those actually no longer exist in 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 and are going to be using points going forward for narrative play. Now, we will do a video on what happened to power levels, so keep tuned to the channel when we release that video as well. And this format also allows you to create your own custom missions, and it will allow you to tell the story through those missions, and maybe even give units particular rules and such to allow you to have that narrative aspect going in your games as well. So the pros of this format of play, it's great to be able to create your own exciting stories and moments while setting up and during and after your games as well. It allows you to focus on more of a thematic experience for playing Warhammer 40,000 for both your army construction and your gameplay experience. You can choose how you play your narrative game, either by the following methods that were previously published by Games Workshop if you're able to find them, custom methods that you create on your own or that somebody else created, or by using something that we're going to be talking about in a second. And you can also play your games with or without specific game mechanics, or even come up with some of your own bespoke game mechanics for this form of play. However, the cons of this form of gameplay is that you can actually get bogged down in prolonged structured narrative campaigns over a longer period of time. If you're playing with the same gaming group over that prolonged period of time, then players could stop playing in the campaign. So it's always best to try and keep it shorter. And there are unfortunately players in the community who say that they are narrative players, but their army list and playstyle do not fit the spirit of playing a narrative game with a narrative mindset. Then we come to the format that I was just alluding to in the narrative section, which is Crusade. Now, once again, I'm going to talk a bit about the Crusade format separately to the narrative way of playing Warhammer 40,000. So Crusade was actually introduced in 9th edition of the game with the core rules, various campaign supplements for Crusade specifically throughout the edition, along with rules for each faction for Crusade in each codex. Now, Crusade is a narrative rule set that continues its depth from 9th edition into 10th edition, allowing you to continue to use an existing Crusade force if you have one, or play a fresh force as well, using Crusade specific missions and scoring. As you play your games with your Crusade force, they will gain experience and be able to be given additional bonuses over time, or they could suffer injuries if the unit is destroyed during your games, resulting in negative effects to them as well. There are also a series of Crusade only relics army expansion and skill trees in the Crusade supplements such as Leviathan, which is sitting right behind me on my shelf, which does have the Leviathan Crusade rules in the big rulebook from the Leviathan box set. Now, Games Workshop have changed how they're doing Crusade content for 10th edition, with campaign supplements being more focused on a form of warfare in the 41st millennium rather than being focused on a couple of factions like they were in the 9th edition Crusade or campaign supplements. So there are a couple of pros to going with Crusade if you're wanting to do so. Crusade has got a great structure to create and play narrative focused games if you have not ventured into narrative play before. It adds plenty of unique rules and additions to enhance your narrative gameplay experience, which previously may have not been existent in the game or have been customly created by the community. It also allows for multiple players to play together at the same time, whilst also enabling you, if you wish to do so, to play against non-Crusade armies if you wish to do so, if your opponent is willing also. However, there are a couple of cons to the Crusade format. There are a lot of rules with Crusade, and it can be a lot of additional knowledge and learning that you need to do if you're still relatively new to playing Warhammer 40,000 in general. And at this time, it's currently unknown if there will be Crusade rules for all the factions in the Codex releases, in addition to the campaign supplements that they're going to be doing for Crusade. Now, the next form of play we're going to be talking about is match play. Now, match play is the most common form of Warhammer 40,000 gameplay that you'll be able to get into. Match play has some requirements, with the primary requirement of being how you play the games by using the current Leviathan mission cards that were just released last weekend. This form of the game is considered to be more often the balanced way of playing the game because they constantly get updates to the format more frequently than a lot of the other formats do. Now, the pro is it is the most common way to play the game, so you're going to be able to get relatively balanced games in quite regularly and quite easily. It does add in additional mechanics through the use of the mission cards, and the points are updated approximately every 6 months to help maintain some form of game balance, which helps rein in units that are overperforming or help adjust the cost of units so that you can take units that may be underperforming instead of, say, something that's overperforming because it costs more now. The con, however, is the format of the game can require additional resources such as the mission cards, in addition to the core rules and the faction rules of your choice as well. 10th edition has given every faction a complete reset. However, the codexes aren't going to be starting to be released until spring, which is spring for us, it's autumn for Northern Hemisphere gamers. And once they are started to be released, it will take time for all of the factions to receive their 10th edition codexes, leaving some factions playing with their initial 10th edition rules for potentially a year or more waiting upon their codex. Now, last but not least, we come to organized play. Now, organized play uses the match play format in different gaming settings, such as gaming leagues, slow grows, escalation leagues, and single or multi-day tournaments, just to name a few. The method of playing the game will have a tournament or community organizer depending on the event, commonly known as a TO, who will specify the points limit, the missions, the game time limits, if there are in use, that are going to be used for the event you are playing in. Now, some parameters that an organizer may set in place for an escalation league might not be appropriate to be set in place for a 2-day tournament. So bear that in mind. Always read the players packs that the TO or the community organizer puts out for an event, because that will have all the information you need to know for the event you are planning on attending or being involved with. Now, the organizer is also generally in charge of managing the time limits, player pairings, as well as answering any rules questions or rules disputes between players if they do arise throughout the event. Now, there are a couple of pros for playing in this format of the game. Every player should have the same understanding of what is expected of them when they are playing a game in an organized play environment. For a slow go or an escalation league, they will allow you to get in regular games of Warhammer 40,000 and are in general more relaxed compared to a single or multi-day tournament. Now, this format of the game will also allow you to meet new people and play against new factions you may not have played against before. So it's a really great way to meet new people within your wider community. However, there are a few cons to doing match play in an organized format quite regularly. If the organized plays a tournament in some form or another, I personally would not recommend entering it if you're still relatively new to the game and still trying to get your head around the rules as well as your army rules. It can be a lot to learn at once, and because you've got to manage time limits and giving your opponent a good play experience as well as best as possible, if you're still relatively new to the game, you may not find that occurring when you probably don't intend for that to happen for your opponent. So it's just something to bear in mind for you newer players out there. You might encounter some people that you just won't get along with, or that might treat you in a way that you just don't appreciate. Just as it is in any other place in our world, be polite and respectful towards them at all times. However, if things do get out of hand and you're no longer able to actually tolerate how they are treating you or their attitude or their behavior, feel free to speak to an organizer and ask them to step in and speak with the player that is a problem. Generally in tournaments, there is the TO there for that specific reason, and they should have structures in place to be able to handle bad sportsmanship or bad behavior from attendees at tournaments or even some of the leagues that I've mentioned as well. Now, you may end up not being able to get a full 5-turn game in due to the time limit in place because of the rounds and how many rounds you're trying to get through in a day at a tournament. And these organized play events commonly have an entry cost to participate in them, which might take away from the funds that you're wanting to put towards purchasing new miniatures or hobby supplies if you're newer to the game as well. So that is something to keep in mind if you do have a smaller budget for your wargaming hobbying. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the summary of the main ways that you can play Warhammer 40,000 commonly during 10th edition of the game. Now, I would have mentioned during this video a couple of different things that you're probably thinking, what am I on about? What am I referencing here? But if you are new to the game, don't stress at all. I will be covering them in future videos as well in this series, so you're able to be fully equipped and understand. So if you need to rewatch this video at a later time and reference what I mean from another video I create in this series, that way it'll help make a bit more sense for you in terms of what I'm referencing here. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one of you for sticking around and watching this video right to the end for the How to Play Warhammer 40,000 10th edition series. I hope you did get a lot out of this video as well. I hope that it was informative and helped get you started with some of the different ways that you can enjoy the game of Warhammer 40,000. Now, if you do enjoy the content we are creating here on YouTube, feel free to hit the like button if you did enjoy this video. Leave a comment with what gameplay format you enjoy most or you're wanting to try out at some point in 10th edition as well. And if you do want to catch more of this series, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you're going to be able to be notified when we release more videos in this series as well. I also want to thank everyone that is supporting us on our Ko-Fi. It's like Patreon, but it's got a bit more benefit to it because not only do we have the memberships there where you can support the ATWN from as little as $1 Australian a month, so consider currency conversion, that is going to be less than $1 wherever you are in the world. It could be more, depends on your local currency. We also have ATWN objective markers. We've still got a couple of those in stock if you are wanting to grab your hands on them, as well as the ScottyD 49 dice in the merch store on our Ko-Fi page. Or if you do want to support us with a one-off donation, that is welcome as well, but no pressure to do so considering the times we are in. Any support you provide is always appreciated, even if it is just likes, comments, subscribes, all that is free to engage with our content is also greatly appreciated. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.